Well, hello there. Good evening, and welcome to Last Days Live. Thank you for tuning in. I pray that the next 30 minutes or so will be a blessing to you. I think it's one of the most important things I do all week, pray a lot about it, and do research and that kind of thing. And so I hope that it's a benefit to you in a big way. As we start this particular post, I want to, tell you a story. Started off in a realm of appearances, the way things look. And what I'm about to say, some of you are going to judge me as being prejudicial, or you're going to suggest that I'm profiling, whatever it may be, right up front. And some of that may be accurate, okay? But let me finish the story before you judge me too harshly, because I think what I have to say is very important. Shiloh, Margie, good to see you. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad that you're here. I really appreciate it. I want to draw your attention to my T-shirt. Can you see that? Let me see if I can get up here. It says, "Y'all need Jesus." And Jesus is in big letters. I was attracted to it when I was at Walmart because for several things. I like the fact that Jesus is in big letters. And it's really soft. It's one of my favorite T-shirts. I really like that. Hi, Kenita. Good to see you. Thanks for tuning in. So I had this shirt on about a week ago. I had this shirt on, and I was going in and out of a public building. I had to make several trips in and out of this public building. And as I was coming in and out, there was a guy sitting. He wasn't really in his car. You know how some people have their car their door hanging open, and they're just kind of sitting halfway in the car and halfway out? Well, yeah. I saw this guy, and honestly, he looked a little shady. Again, be whatever you want to do with that, but he looked a little shady. And I'm of the opinion that, folks, appearance matters. When I go to the fast food place and I walk up and the guy standing behind that counter looks like he hasn't washed his hair in a week and he's grody and has all that appearance, I'm concerned about my hamburger. I don't know, maybe I'm just a bad guy, but I'm concerned because if he can't take care of his own self, if he's not going to present himself and his own body, present it as an attractive, clean-looking, responsible individual, I'm concerned for my own hamburger. I don't know. Maybe I'm over the top on that, but that's just the way I am. Well, this guy kind of had that appearance. And so I tried not to be, I tried not to dismiss him. So I actually kind of nodded at him, smiled at him as I was carrying things to the car. And then as I went back into the public building, I think it was the second, maybe the third time, the guy followed me in. And it didn't really creep me out. It is a public building, whatever it may be. But as I was leaving, carrying some stuff, the guy was just ahead of me. And he was looking over his shoulder at me, and he was with another fella. And again, here I go, But this guy, he had some kind of a weird, I don't know what you call the thing, bandana, whatever, on his head. His two front teeth were gold. He was, middle of the day, he was in his sleep pants and slippers. And so I don't know, you do what you want with me, but I was concerned, because of the appearance. And as we were approaching the door, about to go out into the parking lot, as we were approaching the door, the guy, he looks at me and he says, he says, "I don't need Jesus." I think he said, "I don't need that guy." And then he said, "I don't even know who that guy is." And he was being really smart about it. I had thought previous that I wasn't going to make friends with the fellow, but I thought I was being cordial and I was being nice when I nodded to him, kind of smiled his way and that kind of a thing. But then he says this to me, I don't need that guy. I don't even know who that guy is. Really smart. And he said it so that his friend could hear it. I know he was hoping that his friend would validate it, I suspect, whatever it may be. Anyhow, long story short of it, I don't think I was wrong in judging this man by his appearance. Now, I can't judge completely, obviously, and you got to be, you can't judge a book by its cover, that kind of a thing. But there are some things you can tell about a book by its cover, and so I don't think it's wrong for us to make judgments based upon what we see. Otherwise, we're going to put ourselves in many unsafe settings regularly. But back to my shirt. After he said that to me, it really, really bothered me. And I had about a 30-minute drive home. And I thought about it for a long time. I told Cindy the story, and I told her, I said, I really feel bad for that guy. But here's the reason I feel bad for the guy. Something about my appearance forced him into that setting where he felt like he needed to make some kind of an abrasive statement about my shirt. And so I got to thinking about my shirt. Y'all need Jesus. That's kind of one-sided, isn't it? I'm going to have Cindy, she's got this little thing with you, a grasshopper? What do you call that thing, Cindy? A cricket. It's called a cricket. She got this little cricket thing, and it makes iron-ons, whatever. And I'm going to have her amend my shirt. I love my shirt, but I've decided that my appearance has to be very, very appropriate because we're living in the last days. And folks need to be drawn to Jesus, not pushed away from him. So I'm going to have Cindy, let me see if I can get, everything's backwards on the screen. There it is, y'all. I'm going to have her cross that out, maybe in red or something, make a big slash across that. And then over top of it, she's going to say, we all. Because that's the truth, right? I don't want to approach people with this kind of an attitude that I don't need Jesus. Now, I believe that it's more than appropriate, and you know that because I'm kind of an in-your-face guy. I believe it's more than appropriate for us to say what Jesus says and to say it with the power that Jesus says it. I don't have any problem with that. But at the same time, if there's anything about my appearance that helps people or makes people believe that somehow I feel like I'm above grace, that I don't really need God, that I'm too good for that, I got to change that. I don't want that to happen. It's a fine line. There's a lot of folks out there that don't like me. I get that. And a lot of it's because I'm forcing them to make some conclusions about their own life. I'm one of those guys who doesn't put it to sleep. I poke the bear. I get that. Just like Jesus did, just like Paul did. In fact, I was studying just this past Sunday, I was studying from Luke chapter 10 about the Good Samaritan. It's an interesting story. Do you know why Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan? One of the most famous stories Jesus ever tells. You know why he tells that? Because he was tempted by a bunch of folks, self-righteous folks, who came to them specifically to test him. And they were tempting him. They were basically trying to make him look bad in front of everybody else in his values. And so Jesus gives them a little mini sermon, and he tells them that they need to love the Lord God with all their heart, soul, their mind, love their neighbor as themselves. He could have stopped there. In fact, I think he would have stopped there had they not pressed him. But they, wanting to look good in front of everybody, they said, well, who's my neighbor? And at that point, Jesus has had enough. And you know what he does? He pokes the bear. And Jesus tells the story. The thing that's interesting about this story is that the hero of the story is one of the most hated folks in all of Judaism. It was a Samaritan, the half-breeds. Nobody liked the Samaritans. In fact, the Jews would walk all the way around that area so they didn't have to get the dust of Samaria on their feet. And yet, Jesus intentionally chooses to make a Samaritan the hero of his story. But it's more. He then makes the bad guys a priest and a Levite, two of the most supposedly respectable individuals in the Jewish religion. What was Jesus doing? He was saying stuff that's in your face because he recognized that sometimes that's the only way people will wake up and do what they needed to do. Jesus was in a mode. He recognized that in these moments, he only had a little bit of time in his ministry before he was going to be put on the cross, and so he had to take care of business. Well, we're in a similar situation. These are the last days. It's time for somebody to get a little bit excited about it. It's time for somebody to say the stuff that everybody needs to be hearing, whether they like it or not, whether you lose friends or not. It's time for us to be more like Jesus, and I guess I'm that guy. But back to my shirt. At the same time that I am willing to say stuff that most folks aren't willing to say, I don't want anybody out there to think that I believe I'm above grace, because I am not. I go to bed every night with a bellyache because there are things that are on my heart, things that I've had to say that day that I just simply didn't want to say. I don't want to put it out there. I've actually spent the first half of my ministry, I was pretty good at just making friends. I mean, really. I'm one of those guys that I can make friends pretty easily. And I have people all the time say to me, Sonny, what happened to you? Why all of a sudden is there this change? Let me answer the question for you. Because I have been convinced we're living in the last days. And as I look around us with regards to the chaos that's happening in our culture, somebody has to say something. I'll be the guy if I have to be. And I am that guy. And yeah, I'm losing support. I'm losing friends. I got folks who just, they hate me. They just don't like hearing the things that I'm saying. And it's because I won't let it go. I continue to press. And the reason I continue to press is because I am convinced that this is a message that has to be had in order for our culture to turn from chaos back into some semblance of order. And if it's not going to change that, then at the very least we have got to step up and take care of our family and do what's necessary. So yeah, I'm willing to be the bad guy. But I am not willing to suggest to the world that I am above grace or that somehow I've got it all figured out. Because hear me, as I slap the desk, I I'm just trying to quote scripture to you folks. I'm just trying to deliver stuff that, and by the way, if I post something that doesn't have scripture as its basis, you just not only dismiss it, but you just feel free to unfriend me if you want to. But guys, if I give you stuff that's rooted in Bible, that's from the book, that's from God. And so yes, I am a weak person. Yes, I have got frailties. Yes, I need to learn from you. I have not been a great parent. I have not been a great father. I have not been a great evangelist. I am still a work in progress. I admit it up front. But when the Lord, like Jeremiah, places a message on my heart and it burns inside of me like a raging fire, even though I want to hold it back, I can't. Because I'll tell you something, and I love you people. I'm going to tell you something. I love God more than I love you. I've got to be right with God. My conscience has to be clear. I've got to believe, even though I go to bed with a bellyache thinking to myself, man, I wish you didn't have to say that. At the very least, I want to put my head on the pillow and say, but God, I did what you asked me to do. Okay, that's enough of my rant. Let's move on into what we got to do this evening. It's happening right before our eyes, folks. I mean, right in front of us. The last days are playing out. Are you paying attention? That's what this time together each Monday night at 8 o'clock is supposed to be all about. All right, let's deal number one. You got 3 segments, as you know, as we as we try to get through this material. The first is current events. You're not surprised that I'm going to go here. This Jeffrey Epstein guy, boy, I'll tell you what, and a lot of stuff I don't even want to read that I've discovered about this fella is pretty perverted. Because I don't know the audience, the mixed audience that I've got, I'm going to be a little bit careful here, but this is a guy who had some real problems. And I'm just I'm going to be as fair as I can. And I'm told that he had powerful friends, some of whom are individuals who are really sweating right now. Probably not sweating as much now that this guy has hung himself and committed suicide. How in the world does he do that when he's on a suicide watch? Well, I'll tell you how. Somebody arranged that he didn't have to be on a suicide watch for a little while. We're going to get to the bottom of this, I hope. But there's some powerful people who don't want us to know the answers. But two of those people, Bill Clinton and our president, right now, who are friends with this guy, and many others. This guy was a big contributor to Harvard University, etc., etc. But Jeffrey Epstein, he was accused of being a sex trafficker, dies by suicide, according to this particular article. Sex trafficker. I'm telling you, abortion is at the top of my list. I just cannot imagine somebody, especially a woman, who would be willing to kill her unborn child. But probably second to that, with regards to the horror that comes to my heart, is sex trafficking, which is happening at our southern border, where the liberals are really concerned that we're not going to that we're not going to be careful, we're not going to screen the people, they just want to open the doors and let them come in. And I like to say to all of those liberals, just open your own door to your own house and bring them on in. Every one of those liberals who's whining about what we're doing at the border are individuals who have not, that I'm aware of, have not been willing to take somebody into their own home. So, you're going to preach it, live it. I feel like that this Jeff Epstein guy, I don't feel like it seems like it's been proven that he was a predator. And as he preyed on especially young women, he drew others into his lair, powerful individuals, largely men, who would take advantage of these young girls. Little St. James, I'm told, was the island that he owned, and it became known as Orgy Island or Pedophile Island because of, and I'll just leave it there, what went on there at that island. He was a millionaire, so he had a lot of money and private jet, all of those kind of things. And so he attracted people, and he took advantage of a lot of young girls. And so we know the stories that's playing out in the news now. And so this guy was brought to prison, and he was under a suicide watch. Let me just read what I've got here. It says Epstein, a disgraced millionaire who was facing federal sex trafficking charges, died of suicide early Saturday. Law enforcement sources and the Bureau of Prisons confirmed to ABC News. Epstein hung himself, the source said. He was found unresponsive in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan around 6:30 a.m., the Bureau of Prisons reported. Epstein was 66. He was to stand trial next year for allegedly sexually abusing dozens of girls in New York as well as Florida. His death came less than 3 weeks after he was found unresponsive in his cell at the federal prison in Lower Manhattan with marks on his neck that appeared to be self-inflicted, sources told it. So this is less than 3 weeks after the guy has already obviously tried to kill himself. And so he's supposed to be on suicide watch. He was placed on suicide watch on July 23rd, but was not on suicide watch at the time of his death. Something went wrong, and so the guy wasn't being watched. The FBI is investigating the incident according to the Bureau of Prisons. Epstein was arrested in July. I already talked about that. I guess my concern is that who's conducting this investigation? And I don't know. This Barr guy seems to have some credibility. I'm interested in where he goes with this guy. He doesn't seem to be afraid of either side. But of course, you got your liberals, and the liberals. Let's remember what the liberals are willing to do. The liberals are willing to be critical of anything that Trump does that hints of being an abuse, a misstep, whatever it may be. But all you got to do is bring up somebody from the Democratic Party, and they rally around those people like they're saints. There is no objectivity on the left. And frankly, it would be easy for you and I on the right as conservatives not to have any objectivity as well. But let me just say it right up front. If President Trump is found to have been involved in sex trafficking, I hope he spends the rest of his life behind bars. There, I've said it, and I mean it. Because I just can't fathom the thought. But anyhow, going on with this particular case, one last thing that I'd share with this Jeffrey Epstein dude is that this is ridiculous. Financier Jeffrey Epstein allegedly even had improper sexual contact, with young women while he was in jail, according to a lawyer. I guess my question is, how in the world can the same government that can't keep a key witness alive during a suicide watch be trusted to keep you safe with more gun control? Now, I know I'm changing the subject just slightly, but I think that the two not only go hand in hand, but it's an issue that I'm very, very concerned about because of this very thought. Think about it. The liberals are out there saying to us that the solution to our violence problem is that we should have more gun control. If that was true, Chicago would be one of the safest places on the planet. Obviously, the one deterrent that we still have at our disposal, and sometimes it's not even law enforcement, because look what happened to this guy. We can't even trust this guy to go to jail, to go to trial because of what's happening. Sometimes it's law enforcement. Sometimes it's the political system. That you just can't trust what's going on around about you. And so if we're going to surrender our weapons to a government that can't even be trusted to balance the budget or keep Jeff Epstein alive, I cannot see any logic in it. I saw this on Facebook as well. And I don't mean for it to be at all funny because this isn't a funny topic. You got that AO, whatever her name is up there, that representative from New York. Give me one reason that you need an AR-15. Well, you were the one that said that the government's setting up concentration camps. So, now let me just be clear. I don't believe there's concentration camps at all. I have a guy who claims to be a real expert in the Second World War, and the only reason he even parallels them to concentration camps is because he's too worried about actually admitting the truth. The truth is, we are being, in many cases, more humane to the folks on our southern border than places they come from. You know why I can say that with total confidence? Because they would go home. If they had it better, they'd go home. And so I'm not suggesting that we should be cruel, etc., but I am suggesting that they need to come here in a legal fashion. And there is no way to make that happen if we're just going to open the doors and say, just waltz on in here. Because we're seeing it. Individuals that come here, many of them are violent criminals, and many of them are committing horrible, heinous acts. I get it. I recognize there are also children down there, etc., and I am all for us doing our best to make our borders easier accessed. I'm all for that. But it's not only unchristian, it's ridiculous for us to suggest that Jesus would just have us to park our brain. I think it was the Lord who said that we were to be as wise as serpents and harmless as doves. I think implied within that is that you're not supposed to just be a dummy. And so, to you liberals out there who are watching, take your front door off your house and let them come in. You want to do that, that's fine. But I don't think it's Christian. I don't think that that's what Christ is asking for us to do at all. But again, you see the inconsistencies of our liberal friends here. You know, you got this lady, you know, give me one reason why you need an AR-15. Give me one reason. And then the guy, he comes back, and of course this guy would never have said that, I'm sure, but the comeback is, well, hold it. Aren't you the one who's talking about these concentration camps at the borders? I don't want to be in one of those, and so yeah, I want to be able to defend myself. I thought it was a pretty powerful post. You probably can't read that. I hate that, but I found this one to be very sobering. If the left is willing to lie, cheat, and steal, and do this from you while you're armed to the teeth, imagine what they'll do once they've made it illegal for you to defend yourself. Wow. That is sobering. We at present have the right to own weapons. There is a considerable amount of limitations upon what we cannot own at this particular point, some of which, by the way, I think is appropriate. But at the same time, if you extrapolate this thing out, you just go back and consider the last Supreme Court justice that was appointed and what that poor man had to go through. You consider what many of them are doing. They talk about President Trump inciting violence in our nation, but you just look at some of these liberals, especially in Hollywood, and what they're saying about what they would like to do with him, take him out back. Biden said that. You know, here's a vice president, and he's trying to become our president. And individuals going around with a severed head that looks like Trump and talking about how that one of their greatest fantasies is to stand over the grave of his son, you know, those kind of things. I mean, this is sick. This is sick. And we need to be balanced, because I believe that President Trump needs to have some self-discipline with all of his eternal tweeting. I believe that. But at the same time, it's just not balanced. It's not objective to suggest that the liberal left isn't always out there in the middle of throwing gas on the fire. And here's one I think meme that kind of exposes that. You just think about what the liberal left is doing present tense and ask yourself, are you sure that you can trust them to defend you, especially if you're a Christian? Okay. Application I would suggest to you with regards to this current event is that only God is truly just and only God is truly reliable, and so you need to invest in Him. I wanted to read one last thing from this little article about this Jeff Epstein, because this is so sad. This comes from Jenna Lisa Jones, age 30, an alleged victim of Epstein. When she was 14 in Florida, she says this took place. I am extremely mad and hurt, thinking he once again thought he was above us, and he took the easy way out. I still can't wrap my head around the fact that this is really true. God will have His judgment now. That's powerful, because He will. Right now, that man is with the judgment that is appropriate for him to have. And yet, we've got individuals on this side of eternity who did not get justice. Why did they not get justice? Because you can't trust our government. You can't. And you can't expect them to be reliable. You just can't. I guess one of the reasons I'm a big fan of our president is not because of his immoral past, and not because of his eternal tweeting, and not because of his foul mouth and all that kind of thing, but because he's a guy, I believe, much like Nebuchadnezzar, that God brought to this time so that he could do a job. And that job is to begin to open up the floodgates of the swamp of Washington, D.C. And he's uniquely qualified for this particular job. He's been there. He knows what it's like to go toe-to-toe with powerful people, but he's not a politician. I am not in any way validating his foul mouth and his horrible past. I'm not doing that. But I am saying that God often uses wicked people to bring about a just judgment. It's my prayer, and I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest this, that God's actually breaking through in his heart. He has surrounded himself, Trump that is, he has surrounded himself with a lot of prayerful people. And so unlike our former president, Obama, who I believe was really a closet Muslim, I think that there might actually be some progress that's being made for our present president. I prayed, by the way, the prayer of Nicodemus just as much as I prayed it for Trump, or am praying it for Trump. I prayed it for Obama, but I don't think that it ever came to fruition. His change didn't seem to ever come. So that's the application I got for you. Now let's go with biblical warning. I've got to run because, well, I've gone long already, haven't I? I got 25 minutes. Are you still out there? Biblical warning, here you go. We're trying to predict the end. As I've told you in the past, it's impossible for us to know. In fact, this passage actually says that. But about the hour, the day of the hour, no one knows, not even the angel of heaven or the Son, but only the Father. However, notice all of the various things I've got circled here and the one little line that I've got underlined here, because I think this is really important. He goes on to say, even though you can't know the specific times, be on guard, be alert, keep watch, watch. And then he says, finally, do not let him find you sleeping. What does that tell you about the fact that you can't know specifically, but you can know generally, I think is the application. That we need to be on guard, we need to be watching. Evidently, there's something that you and I can be alert for. We need to be like the 5 wise virgins who keep our lamps trimmed and ready when the bridegroom comes. We've got to be individuals who are not found asleep. When the Lord returns, he's got to find folks who are watching, ever having our eyes on the skies. That's why I've gotten in trouble recently when I have suggested that we need to keep our family close. And sending them off for the majority of their waking hours each school day, I'm just not sure that's the wisest thing to do. You think about it. We're placing them on buses en masse. We're placing them on buses and asking one person who's not even turned around facing them to not only transport them safely, but to make sure that garbage is not happening behind them as far as interaction between the students. You think about the target that is for individuals who hate our children. Then we take our most precious possessions and we put them in one central location for the majority of their day. Folks, it just doesn't make any logical sense as far as defense is concerned, let alone the impact the parents need to have on these kids. It just doesn't make any common sense. But we're doing that. We've got to step up. And I am of the opinion that the church is presently in very much a slumber condition. We are complacent. We don't want to hear it. When folks like myself say things that nobody wants to hear, what do? They cut them off. They persecute them. They refuse. They withdraw support from them. They'll write them up. They'll do whatever. They persecute the messenger. You remember what Jesus said about Jerusalem and how the prophets died there? Jerusalem's the epicenter of God's movement. And yet he said that was the place, the common place where folks who were speaking the message of God went to die. I think the application is that sometimes the hardest people on God's people are God's people. We need to be careful with that. But he can all the way through, be on guard, be alert, keep watch. Do not let him find you sleeping. All of that tells me, wake up, folks. We've got a responsibility. If you're a dad, you need to step up and be a man and make some of those difficult decisions about making sure your family is safe. All right. I promised you last week that I was going to run through what I think are the 2 primary conditions that God uses to determine whether or not he's going to bring the end or bring judgment. As I said, I believe that we're in a constant cycle. Humanity is in a constant cycle. We've been in this cycle ever since we left the garden. But it's a cycle where we'll do well, we'll do good, we'll pay attention to God for a while, and then we'll take our attention off of him. We'll wander until eventually we are so far out in left field that God has to do something radical to bring us back, and so he brings persecution down upon us. He allows that to happen to us so that he can regain our attention. Much like my dad did it on many occasions. He said, "Sonny, when we get home, you're going to get a whooping." You know what that did to me? It put the fear in me because I didn't want a whooping. But he needed to do that because I needed a whooping in order for me to recognize that I need to change. I think we're there. I don't know how much longer God can put up with this perverted culture that we are living in. We are the most religious, it seems, as far as Christianity is concerned, and the concentration of those who call themselves Christians, America. If we set the bar for morality in the world, it's a sick world. So, one of the things I think that you can do is you look over your shoulder as far as biblical history is concerned. Ask yourself, what has God done in the past to kind of indicate that we're getting close to a time when he's going to bring judgment? Well, there are 2 things, and they're not hard to prove. I'm going to use 2 major characters of the Old Testament, Abraham and Lot, and then I'm going to take you to the New Testament and show how that even in the New Testament they use these 2 major characters to predict when the Lord was coming or when the Lord's judgment was about to take place. And so here's your first one. It seems as you study this subject that the first thing God does is he looks at the ratio of godly to ungodly. The second thing he does is he looks at the ratio of civility to cruelty. That seems to be the 2 qualifiers, if you will, as to when God is going to bring judgment down upon the planet. As I said, I think one of two things is about to happen. Either we are going to be judged because we're a horrible nation, and persecution conquered by another nation, civil war, whatever, or number two, the Lord's going to return, and we're going to see the end of this whole thing. I personally think it is number two. But one of those two things I think is on the horizon. If that is true, then I think it's important for you and I to recognize the signs of the time. What does God see with regards to the ratio of godly to ungodly, the ratio of civility to cruelty? Can you even prove, Sonny, that those are actual qualifiers that God uses? Well, I'm glad you asked. Notice Noah in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, then skipping on, you see that. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. There's some pretty big expletives there. All seem to show up there, and full of violence. It's every inclination. The first point is the ratio of godly to ungodly. It sounds to me, if you take some of those phrases that I've underlined and that one that I've got circled there, it sounds to me that God is looking down and he's seeing this planet that has become full of violence. So what's the ratio of godly to ungodly? It's not very high. It's tilted so far out of balance that God says, okay, enough's enough. And you might recall what takes place then with this story is we're going to have Noah build the ark, and we're going to save 8 folks. 8 folks is all we see saved from the planet. The conditions have tilted so far out of balance. But it wasn't just Noah. The same kind of a principle applies with regards to Abraham. Let me go back real quickly because I don't think I showed you this. Notice also you've got the ratio of civility to cruelty here. Every inclination of their heart, you got that. But it also says that the whole place was full of violence. All the people of the earth were corrupted. So you got both of those things happening. You've got the ratio of godly to ungodly, which is so far out of balance, God says enough. And then you got the ratio of civility to cruelty, which is so far out of balance, and God says enough. Okay? Now watch this one. Genesis chapter 18. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, ... Pause for a moment. Who is crying out to the Lord here? Now, it doesn't tell us specifically, but I've got several thoughts on who it might have been. It could have been Lot. In fact, the New Testament indicates that his heart was broken, given what he saw happening in the city. But I also think that it might very well have been the innocent. Unlike the Calvinists, I am convinced that a child, regardless if the child is born to a prostitute, the child's innocent. The child is not guilty of its mother's sin, and that child is innocent. I do not believe that child inherits the sin of Adam. I believe that's covered in Ezekiel chapter 18. But that all said, understanding what happens here, I believe that some of those who are crying out against Sodom and Gomorrah were the children. Maybe children who were being sacrificed in their form of abortion. Individuals that we know that at times like this are horrible things, of children being placed on burning altars and sacrificed to the false gods, etc. Maybe those are the screams that are going up before God. Whatever it was, God was so enraged at what he saw that God was willing to end it all, including children evidently who were in that setting, because he realized that it would be better for them to have their condition ended than to suffer through what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. Whatever it was, these cries are going up before God, and it says, then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Then notice verse 24. What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Now you remember, you see the ... I'm not going to go the whole context. You can go back and read it for yourself, but you remember what comes next. Basically, Abraham's going to dicker with God. And he's going to say, okay, but what if, and he's going to get all the way down to 10 folks. Did he find 10 people in that big city? Nope. Couldn't even find 10. How many folks actually escaped the city? Lot, Mrs. Lot, and 2 daughters, right? And Mrs. Lot doesn't make it far. And the 2 daughters in the cave with Daddy do the unspeakable. Yeah? Lot lost his family. You know why? Because Lot pitched his tent toward Sodom, then moved into Sodom, raised his daughters in that perverted culture, and so when it finally came to the end, his perverted context influenced the daughters so much that they did the perverted thing in the cave with their father. Daddies, listen to me. You got to bring your children into a safe condition. Parenting is front-loaded. The intensity of your parental influence is so front-loaded that by the time they get to the age of 18, their own decision-making processes have begun to take over to such a great degree that your level of parental influence is greatly diminished and, in many cases, gone completely. We've got to utilize these early years with regards to our children. We've got to maximize. That's why I think Deuteronomy chapter 6 is so important, verses 4 through 9. Every time you get up, you walk along the way, you lay down, you're sitting at the supper table, whatever it is, you talk about God's stuff. Parents need to maximize the majority of the hours of their children during the day. Sending them off to others to do the job for us, I do not believe in these last days is a very wise move at all. Lot lost his family. He lost his daughters to perversion because he wasn't man enough to step up and to make the difficult decision. I suspect the New Testament indicates that it grieved him. I suspect there were moments when Lot said to himself, honey, speaking to Mrs. Lot, honey, we need to move. We probably shouldn't live here. You know, the girls they're around all this stuff all of the time. I suspect that conversation took place, but they didn't move. And Mrs. Lot turned to a pillar of salt. The two girls have sex with Dad in the cave. Horrible, horrible scenario, all because Dad wouldn't man up. So, verse 24, what if there's just 50 people? Would you? And God says yes. How about 10? Yes. But you know the rest of the story. They go down, the angels go down and they visit the house. And before they'd gone to bed, the last part there, before they'd gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, that's interesting how that the Holy Spirit puts that, all the men from every part. So yeah, the ratio is tilted way out of balance, isn't it? Both young and old. You see how he's trying to emphasize the ratio between the godly and the ungodly. They surrounded the house. Go on and read the rest of the context. I couldn't put it all up here because it was going to be too small and you wouldn't be able to read it. But basically they're trying to beat the house down, beat the door down. And the angels have to reach out and pull Lot back in. By the way, in that process, Lot volunteers to send his daughters out. What kind of dad does that? A dad who won't step up and a dad who puts himself in a scenario just like Sodom and Gomorrah that evidently didn't just influence his wife and his two daughters, but evidently influenced him and made him compromise his convictions. But again, you see the violence. They were trying to beat down the door. So back to my 2 points. So the ratio of the godly to ungodly was so far out of balance, God said enough. The ratio of civility to cruelty was so far out of balance that God said enough. And we know what took place. Sulfur, burning sulfur from heaven falls upon that place. They say that Sodom probably was located somewhere near where we presently have the Dead Sea. I've been there. It's dead. Nothing grows at the Dead Sea. And if that's where Sodom and Gomorrah were, God put his fingerprint on that spot, and to this day it's not changed. It's time to man up. It's time for us to make the difficult calls for our family because we're living in the last days, and I do not want to be a Lot. All right, I thought I had another slide there. Oh, I don't. Baloney breath. I forgot to put it in. Next week, guys, next week I will take you to a New Testament passage that combines both of those characters, not Lot, what are the names? Noah and Abraham. The reason Lot's in the story is because of Abraham. Lot was a kind of a side story to Abraham's experience, and goes to show you another thing. You know, here's a young man who grew up within all of the advantages of the man of faith himself, Abraham, and yet he makes these horribly unwise decisions. Application to you as parents, listen, you only get them for 18 years, and once they're gone, they're gone. And for a large part, your influence is done. And as they begin to establish their own kingdom, their own families, those kind of things, you can't govern their decisions anymore. And many times, because they are a free will agent, they have the free will. Unlike Calvinism, they actually have the ability to make their own choices. Because of that, they may disappoint you. You may have raised them the best of your ability. You may have done just over the top job, but that doesn't mean that they somehow are computerized into having to do it the way mom and dad taught them during the first 18 years. On the other hand, remember this. Scriptures do tell us that if we train up a child in the way they should go when they're old and not depart from it, you have the most influential time of that person's life is those first 18 years. And if we're not taking full advantage of them, we are training an entire generation to basically act on their own. And at that early age, they do not have the ability to make those kind of decisions. And we're paying the price for it, I believe, right now. You're saying, why is the YouTube logo up there? I'll tell you why. Because I have posted a lot of things with regards to this particular subject. And if you would go to my YouTube channel, all you got to do is type in Sonny Childs, but squish it together. Sonny Childs, both all together. You'll find my my channel. I've got all kinds of stuff there that you can go to and you can reference with regards to that. Survival tip. I've gone 40 minutes. Boy, I hope you're still with me. I don't know, but survival tip. I've been trying to show you something each time with regards to, what if the electronic grid goes down? It doesn't even have to be persecution from the government. What if we have got some kind of a horrible national crisis that comes about because of a weather condition or whatever it may be? But I don't know, several years ago, I told you last week, we went through, I think it was 8 days without electricity. And I'm telling you, people get weird when they can't get electricity. They don't have any running water and all those kind of things. Some folks get very, very good, and they'll come together, and good folks will help other folks. But other folks, they'll start stealing generators and doing all kinds of horrible things. We're in a place where we need to be really concerned, because I believe that the electronic grid is going to go down. We already saw it this summer in New York City, and I think that it's likely that we could easily see a national thing. This whole Russia thing with regards to our president being elected, I don't think that was true at all. But I'll tell you what I do think. I think that China and probably others, Muslim countries, I think that they are looking at a way to cripple our electronic grid, because it's one of the things that bring us to our knees quickly. Let me give you a horrible scenario. All of our children are gathered in one place, and the electronic grid goes down. Middle of the school week. You can't get to them, and there they are. Keep your family close. Survival tip. I saw this just today, watching something about survival hacks or whatever. But one of the things I think that could happen with regards to the electronic grid going down and all those kind of things is that we find ourselves in a world of hurt, not just because electricity is gone, etc., but also because how are we going to eat? How are we going to, all of those kind of things. If you got a garden, that's great, but how many of us are gardening nowadays? A lot of us really believe that milk comes from Walmart. You don't get it from a cow. And eggs. I actually had a city slicker who lived not too far from me when we were having chickens, and I took them a dozen eggs. And they looked at them, they saw that they were bigger and they were darker, and they said, can we eat these? I think they really had no idea that, this is what real eggs are supposed to look like. Anyhow, back to my point. So watching these survival things, because who knows what's coming. And by the way, application. If we are individuals who are prepared during these last days, it's going to give us the greatest opportunity for evangelism. In other words, if you know how to get food, if you know how to provide the comforts that are necessary, etc., you're going to be an individual that folks are going to turn to for help. And you're going to have the perfect opportunity, because there's no time in a person's life that they are more interested in God than when they have been made vulnerable. All right, back to my thing. I saw this on I don't know what you call it, a 2 liter, what do you call it? Plastic jug. Got to get over where you can see it. And I cut it in half. So I cut it in half. And the guy said, what you do, you take it, some of you have seen this, and you reverse it. You shove it in there like that. And I had a hole put in here somewhere. Let me match up my holes, because that's important to making it go together. Well, I can't find them. But anyhow, next thing I did, I'm not going to take time to do it because we've already gone along, but I took my little pocket knife and I put a hole right in here, okay? And then I went outside and I cut me a fresh twig off of a tree, so that it's not brittle and fragile, and I put it in that hole, and that kept these two things together. You're saying, what in the world? Well, here's what happens. Little fish, you put it in a stream of water. Little fish will swim in here, and then they get trapped at the base, and all you got to do is pick it up. And you don't want little fish. Well, several reasons, but one of them is because little fish make some of the best bait for big fish. We're trying to figure out a way to eat, right? And so they make best bait for big fish. On the other hand, and this guy said it, also you put out enough of these, you can catch enough little fish that you could probably make yourself a little meal off of little fish. It might be a little crunchy, but hey, listen, if I'm hungry, right? So it's really a simple thing to create, and I thought to myself, wow. Now, Cindy said to me, well, you know what you need to do? You need to take it down to a stream and see whether you can catch any fish with it, and you got video of that, and you can show them whether it works or not. I agree, but I didn't have time to do that, so I watched the video, and it was really, the guy put it in the water, and it was less than a minute, I think he said, before he actually had 2 little minnows in there that he was going to be able to use as bait. Isn't that cool? All right. So there's your this week's whatever you call it. I don't know. So there we go. What do we have left, guys? Is there anything left? Let's see. There's got to be something else. Oh, yeah, the conclusion. Keep your eyes on the skies. He is coming. That's our hope. Keep your family close. Keep your homemaker vigilant. Keep a close watch on the conditions around you, and keep investments in heaven. If you will do those 4 things, I think that you will be pretty well adequately prepared for what is coming down the trail. Be an individual who is looking to the skies, recognizing it's not about here. It's not about big houses and multiple cars. It's not about going on fancy vacations or having a lot of conveniences. It's actually about doing your best to keep it simple. Because the less you have here, the more likely it is you'll be longing to go there. So keep your family close. Make sure you got a homemaker, full-time homemaker who's guarding that home. Keep watch on the conditions. That's what I hope to do with you on Mondays at 8 o'clock each week. And always, always, always invest in heaven, because that's the end game. It's all about going there, not staying here. We got to man up. We got to woman up. We're living in the last days, but he's coming. So, God bless you. Till next time, this is Sonny Childs. Be there. Matthew 16:26.